Welcome to Food for Thought. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I'm your host. My work is dedicated to empowering people to live according to their own values of compassion and wellness. You can learn more about who I am and what I do by visiting my website, joyfulvegan.com. Today's episode is Reasons for Hope, Good News for Animals and Nature from 2022. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing fabulously well. We are back from our month-long trip to Africa. We were in Rwanda, our fourth tour of Rwanda. We were in South Africa and in Botswana, and it's really good to be home. We had a fabulous time, but there's nothing like coming home and sleeping in your own bed. The year is at an end, and I wanted to give you some reason for hope. I know there are lots of news stories and posts and people you follow where we can get pretty overwhelmed by bad news. And I'm here to give you some good news, depending on what we focus on. Of course, we can always find reasons for despair and we can always find reasons for hope. It's really a matter of what we choose to dwell on. And this episode is all about giving you reasons for hope and optimism. There's also a blog post over at joyfulvegan.com to accompany this with some beautiful photos and links and the ability to share very easily. As you know, I do not feel that focusing on hope is a license for complacency. In fact, I think it's a reason to stay active. And you've heard me talk about hope a lot. I hope you've heard me talk about hope. And ironically, I do think that sometimes people who are hopeful can be criticized for being delusional, Pollyanna. And I don't share that opinion. I wrote an essay, several essays, but one of the essays I wrote was for KQED Radio, where I'm a contributor, or who I'm a contributor for. And I'll just give you the gist. I have been an animal advocate for more than 25 years, and I've seen enough cruelty to have a pretty bleak view of the world, and yet I have hope. No, I am not a mythical creature. No, I'm not delusional. And yes, I'm paying attention. And I go on to say that despite all of these things that are wrong in the world, I still have hope. And I say I have hope because I focus on what I can solve rather than on what I can't. I have hope because there's much to be hopeful about. History gives you a great perspective if you just step back. I have hope because outrage doesn't change the world. Vision and vigilance do, along with the political, technological, economic, and moral forces that drive progress forward. I'm hopeful, and I go on and name all of the reasons I'm hopeful. And I end by saying that my hope is not delusional. It's rooted in facts. It's rooted in science, reason, and statistics. My hope is not complacent. It's provisional. It's the difference between wanting things to change and taking action to facilitate that change. And the stories I'm going to share with you today are all about the people who didn't just sit back and say, things are awful for animals, I wish they would change. They actually facilitated the change. And that's why we can share these stories. And so celebrating good news is not only necessary and helpful and healing, but it also enables us to see, well, what's working? What do we want to get involved in? How do we want to be part of the solution? What solutions are there? And what do we want to support? And so just kudos to everyone who is part of the solution. I know many of you listening already are. And kudos to everyone who was part of the reasons for hope in 2022. And this is just a snapshot. There are a lot of other stories I could have shared with you. I'm keeping it to 10, both in the blog post and here on today's episode. So sit back, enjoy, and revel in the fact that there are good people doing good work, effective work for animals and the environment, and that's something to celebrate. So I'll start with one that came about in early 2022, and that is a law that passed in Spain that says that wild animals and companion animals will no longer be considered inanimate objects under the law. And I know that sounds like a low bar, but in many places around the world, many places in the United States, in federal law, animals are considered property. They're not considered sentient beings. So it might seem obvious to you and me that animals are sentient beings, but under the law, they're often not considered such. And what we're seeing is a change in a lot of places in both civil and criminal law. And Spain is now one of them. Now, livestock, quote unquote, animals are still considered property in Spain and in many cities and countries and throughout the world. But in Spain now, we have another country where dogs and cats and wild animals are being given legal status that protects them in both criminal and civil cases. So, for instance, with the passage of this law, what this means is that the welfare of dogs and cats must be considered, say, in divorce proceedings or in separation. So, no longer will an animal be able to be seized or abandoned or separated from their animal guardians in the case of a divorce or separation without their well-being and welfare being taken into account, just like you would do children. So this is incredible news. And the ramifications of changing laws, especially federal, national laws, to declare that animals are sentient beings are huge. And this is just the beginning of what we're seeing. So that's something to celebrate. Yay, Spain. Yay to all of the activists who made this happen. Number 2, I saw this story earlier this year and I was so encouraged by it. It's that in Wyoming, in the United States, miles and miles of fencing are being removed to help wildlife migrate or move around safely. Scientists conservatively estimate that more than 600,000 miles of fences crisscross the American West, which of course hinder wild animals from moving around freely and safely. And in some cases, these fences are just leftover remnants. They were erected decades ago and they no longer serve any purpose. In other situations, they were constructed with little thought about how they would impact other species. And so today there is an emerging field of research called fence ecology. And what you have are land managers and conservation groups. And yes, we have also ranchers who are working together in the United States to remove fences and to be at least aware of how fences can harm animals so they can be built with thoughtfulness, but also removing these fences, especially those that have no purpose anymore. And so we're seeing this in Wyoming. There is an initiative called the Absaroka Fence Initiative. You can go find this out. You can see the link from my website at joyfulvegan.com. And this initiative is a public-private partnership between willing landowners and land managers. And we're seeing volunteers show up and federal agencies show up and landowners show up to remove miles and miles of fencing to help wildlife. That is such good news. And in fact, I'll skip right to the next one, which is also related to wildlife being able to cross easily and migrate easily. And that is number 3, although this is number 4 on the website, but number 3 that I'm adding here is that the largest wildlife crossing in the United States broke ground. In April 2022, construction began for a very long-awaited $90 million wildlife crossing above the US 101 freeway in Southern California. It's the result of a 20-year campaign to create a way for mountain lions and coyotes and other animals, small animals, large animals, really, truly insects, amphibians, like everybody to cross safely, especially in areas where highways have crisscrossed the county and their habitats are just destroyed. And so they cannot cross and migrate safely without being hit by cars. And so this is going to allow mountain lions, foxes, as I said, coyotes, so many animals to cross 10 lanes of Highway 101 without encountering a single car. And this is incredible news. We're seeing more and more stories about wildlife crossings around the world. I'm so encouraged by it. I think it's going to be one of the big news in conservation moving forward. The practice of building and creating wildlife crossings began in France in the 1950s, and it quickly spread to Netherlands, which is now home to one of the largest wildlife bridges. It's half a mile long, 0.8 kilometers long, and you can see pictures of it again at the website. According to the Federal Highway Administration in the United States, about 300,000 wildlife collisions happen on U.S. roadways every year. And these are just estimates because most deaths, especially the smaller animals, do not get reported. So this is a huge, huge victory. And again, you can see that this is just people who have been working for decades to make this happen. It's finally happening. It's great news. And that's number 3. Number 4, going over to England, is 400 years after they were hunted to extinction, beavers are now not only coming back, not only making a comeback, but they are now a protected species in England. As of October 1st, 2022, it's illegal to deliberately capture, injure, kill, or otherwise disturb these charismatic animals. They have reclaimed a foothold in their native land, which is such exciting news, but now they're protected. Now, of course, another government can come in, laws can change, it's true, but today, right now, here and now, we have this story, and we know this. I mean, we tend to perceive wild animals through our own lens of our own convenience, of our own space, but of course, beavers have an incredible role to play in ecology. They are nature's engineers. They create wetlands by building dams, and they create an important habitat for many plants and animals. They prevent flooding and drought-related problems such as wildfires by keeping water in the land. It's fantastic news, and it's something to celebrate. So that is number 4. Number 5, moving all the way to Australia. Australia's Great Barrier Reef shows the best signs of coral recovery in 36 years. 36 years. Of course, there's work to be done, and there are concerns that it could continue to deteriorate. But what we're seeing, and this is from research that's being done by the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, is that the coral is recovering and is resilient. And that's really exciting news because, of course, we hear all the time about the coral bleaching because of rising ocean temperatures. And it's true, it is happening. But this is just an example of how nature is resilient. And with the right things put in place and the right people working on behalf of nature and animals, we are seeing a reversal. Will it remain? Will it stay? We don't know. But right now, this is something to celebrate. And it means that the hard work being done to protect the coral reef is working. So that's something to celebrate. Something else to celebrate, I just want to thank everybody who has been a supporter of this podcast all these years, especially in 2022. You've heard me name specific people. You can be named if you go over to joyfulvegan.com and become a supporter. You can be a benefactor and get named on this podcast in every episode, like David Cabrera and Alexander Gray, you have heard for years be thanked on this podcast. Brooke Boussard is an angel. Michal Stone is an angel. Gina Stryler and Kari Parker are angels. You can be an angel too. You can be a hero like Simon Small and Angelica Lofton and Jennifer Statmiller and Jennifer Watkins, Geraldine Hilmar, PJ Schuster, Denise Hoskins, Ranjini Mohan, Tina Strassheim, and Liz D. Whatever level you support at, it really keeps this work going. So if you would like to make an end of year contribution, you can make a one-time contribution. You can become an annual supporter. You can become a monthly supporter. If you are a supporter and you haven't checked your credit card to see if your support is coming through, please head over to your Patreon account and do so. It would be so wonderful to be able to end this year with some more support from listeners, and whatever you can do is most appreciated. But really, thank you so much for supporting this podcast, for making it possible not only for you who listens, but for everyone else who listens. So you, as a supporter, there are ripple effects, is what I'm saying. So thank you so much, everyone. Good news indeed. Okay, number 6 on our good news for animals and nature is, if you weren't paying attention to the news toward the end of 2022, you would have missed that 200 nations, almost 200 nations, agree to a landmark deal for biodiversity. So COP15, which is the UN Biodiversity Conference that happened in Montreal this year in 2022, There has been, of course, a lot of talk around climate change, but there hasn't been as much in the news about the loss of biodiversity. And so in 2019, scientists sounded the alarm that biodiversity is declining at rates unprecedented in human history and urged global leaders to boldly act. And so they did. And this is incredible news. One of the most significant parts of the pact is an agreement to protect 30% of nature by 2030. It's a 30-30 target. 30% of nature by 2030. It's one of the biggest land and ocean conservation commitments in history. Will it happen? We will see. But the fact that this many nations came together to pledge for conservation in the developing world. There's protections for indigenous people's rights. They're going to take action on everything to prevent extinction of species and threat from human activity, promote their recovery. It's incredible news, and it's something to celebrate. So you can see more over at joyfulvegan.com. I have links to some stories about it. Number 7, also something to celebrate. If you're in the United States, you would have heard about the largest U.S. climate legislation in history signed into law in 2022. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. Doesn't have a very celebratory name. It doesn't sound like it has anything to do with climate legislation, but it does. And it commits $370 billion to combat climate change. It's aimed at slashing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% by 2030, so another 2030 goal, and curbing consumer energy costs at the same time. It's the largest federal response to climate change in history, and it will set the course for substantial changes in how the nation, my nation, produces energy over the next decade. Yes, there were some oil concessions given to a particular senator who needed concessions in order to vote for the bill. But for the most part, it really is expanding funding to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, encouraging a domestic supply chain for electric vehicles, and a lot more. There are tax credits for renewable energy, for electric vehicles, for electric transmissions. Really good news. And again, if you want to read kind of more details about it, go to joyfulvegan.com and click on the blog post about good news from 2022, and you can see more details. Number 8, in Europe, wolves, brown bears, and white-tailed eagles are making a dramatic recovery. Some of the top predators are thriving in Europe, according to a major new report commissioned by Rewilding Europe, a charity working to restore wild spaces across the continent. You've heard me talk about rewilding. I'm going to continue to talk about rewilding. It's another reason I feel really encouraged and hopeful for the future. And the reason we're seeing this dramatic recovery is because of effective legal protections. We're seeing habitat restorations. We're seeing wildlife reintroductions. All of these things are helping to drive species recovery, and we're seeing it happen. And among the top predators, the gray wolf is making the strongest recovery. Once hunted to near extinction, 17,000 wolves are now found across Europe. This is reason for hope. So check out the article I have on that at joyfulvegan.com. And number 9, going to smaller animals, but animals who are so fundamental to the health of humans and the health of ecosystems, is bees. The urban bee population in Netherlands is now steady thanks to a pollinator strategy. And this is something that can be replicated wherever you are. This is so hopeful. So the native bee population in Netherlands has been declining since the 1940s. We're seeing that all across the world. But because they recognize the crucial role wild bees play in the pollination of food crops. And I'm not talking about honeybees. So this is not about having honeybees. This is about wild native bee populations. They are instrumental in the pollination of food crops and really all flowers. The government announced a national pollinator strategy in 2018. And the strategy included 70 initiatives aimed at creating more nesting sites for bees and strengthening their food supply. So again, this has nothing to do with honeybees. This has everything to do with providing certainly flowers, but also things like bee hotels. And you may have seen this, and this is something you can do as well. Basically a collection of hollow plant stems or thin bamboo that provides space for bees to nest, because There are many bees that nest in the ground, and they nest also in these in trees and these little hotels, they're called. And it's something that you can do. And these efforts are working. The latest count of native bees since the project began, which was only a few years ago, showed an increase in the number of bees. So good news all around there. And the fact that they're not declining even more and they are on the upswing is something to celebrate. And number 10, it has not been signed into law as of this recording, but it will be signed into law by the end of the year. And that is a landmark bill that will ban the shark fin trade in the United States. Before the U.S. Senate and the House before it passed this legislation, 14 states and 3 U.S. territories had already banned the sale and possession of shark fins. This new bill will prohibit the fin trade across the entire United States. And this is incredible news. This historic bill bans the buying and selling of shark fins in the United States, thereby removing the entire United States from this trade. As many as 73 million sharks end up in the global market every year. And it's just mind-boggling to even think of that number of animals who are killed just for soup, because that is the majority of, that's the main reason that they're killed. Shark fins are mainly in demand for shark fin soup, which is a luxury dish popular in China and in Hong Kong and other places across Asia. And so this is a monumental win for shark species. And in addition to the main part of it, which would ban shark fins in the United States, the buying and selling of, there are other provisions in the bill that will protect sharks, including the listing of many shark species on the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. You've heard of that, CITES, CITES, and a ban on gear that's used to target sharks in the Pacific. So it's incredible news. I am heartened by this news. I hope you are as well. And I just wanted to give you something to end 2022 with, so that you can move forward looking at 2023 and perhaps get involved in initiatives that you care about. Could be local, could be regional, could be federal, wherever you are. And also support the organizations and the people who are doing the work that is quite literally saving animals, saving nature, saving the environment, and making a huge difference. I always say it's not that we can make a difference. It's that we do make a difference. We don't get to decide whether we can make a difference. We get to decide only if the difference we inevitably make is negative or positive. And the stories I shared with you today, they're definitely making a difference for good. So I hope this gives you some hope in your day, and I hope it gives you some hope as you look forward to the next year. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe. I would love you to take a moment to share a positive rating and review, of course, of the podcast, and share the podcast with others. If you'd like to join me in 2023 in person in Italy or in France, be sure to check out the trips we have at joyfulvegantrips.com. We've got some space in Tuscany. We have one spot left in northern Italy. We've got space in our French countryside trip, and we've got space in our magical Christmas trip in Alsace in December of 2023. So we've got lots for you in 2023, including going on all of these trips. We go to sanctuaries, we go to refuges, and we go and celebrate the work that's being done for animals all around the world. It's one of the aspects of these trips, aside from the fact that obviously we are celebrating the culture in the countries we're in. We're also enjoying the most delicious, cruelty-free, plant-based food every meal, obviously. We're also celebrating the work being done on behalf of animals. In the French countryside, we're visiting the first European elephant sanctuary. In Alsace, we visit a bear and wolf sanctuary. In Tuscany and in northern Italy, we visit farmed animal sanctuaries, and we have just a fabulous time. So go check that out at joyfulvegantrips.com. And of course, join me online. If you don't want to join me in person, you can join me for my online cooking classes. We just added the schedule for the first half of 2023. We've got some great classes coming up, and I hope you can join me. I hope you have a wonderful, safe transition to the new year, and I'll see you in 2023 for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.